When people say Pokemon has declined, the conversation usually focuses on surface level problems. Graphics look outdated, the games feel rushed, performance issues are obvious, animations get reused, etc., etc. Now, these complaints are definitely fair, but they do not explain why these problems keep happening generation after generation. To understand why Pokemon went wrong, you have to stop thinking about it as a game series and start thinking about it as a business system. Pokemon is the highest grossing media franchise in the world, across video games, trading cards, merchandise, anime, films, licensing, and even mobile titles. The franchise has generated over $103 billion in total retail sales. In 2024 alone, Pokemon brought in roughly $12 billion in retail revenue. That means Pokemon now earns more in a single year than many major entertainment companies earn over their entirety. At this level of success, the games stop being standalone creative works entirely. They become the foundation of a global production pipeline. Every mainline Pokemon release determines when the new trading card comes out, when the anime changes seasons, when the merchandise hits stores, and when mobile games roll out events. A single game now coordinates the timing of dozens of industries operating at one time. This is Pokemon's first structural shift. These games no longer exist as their own creative timelines, but the creative backforce of an entire ecosystem. The Pokemon Company makes most of its money through this tightly interconnected revenue stream. In fact, the video games are so irrelevant financially to the Pokemon franchise that most of their money actually comes from merchandising. This business structure places enormous pressure on development cycles, forcing Pokemon to continuously increase production and create more games as the years go by. This pressure did not exist in the early years whatsoever. In early Pokemon, the franchise was small enough to function like a traditional creative project. Junichi Masuda played a central role during this period. He was not only a composer but also a designer for the first game, but then he eventually became the director, starting in the Ruby and Sapphire games, and spearheaded the golden age of Pokemon's growth. These constraints forced the developers to be innovative. Red and Blue pushed the original Game Boy far beyond what it was designed to do. Ruby and Sapphire expanded systems and mechanics on the Game Boy Advance. Diamond and Pearl pushed the Nintendo DS with online features and more complex world design. Each generation introduced major mechanical changes and pushed the envelope on what Pokemon can be. Recently, however, internal documents have leaked about Game Freak, and they described this period as the era of Masuda's absolute dominance. According to those documents, Masuda demanded extremely high standards and maintained strong creative control over the team. Some employees described his leadership style as harsh and authoritarian, and the leak claims he was later removed from directing mainline games, which he currently isn't, because the company executives thought that having someone in a directorial position who was so authoritarian and wanted everything done at the highest standard would hurt profit margins of the company. Now, whether or not everything in that leak was 100% accurate, it still reinforces a broader pattern. Early Pokemon allowed strong creative leadership because the franchise needed that to succeed in a market that was becoming more and more flooded with amazing ideas. As Pokemon grew, that model became incompatible with the size of the brand. The turning point came in 2010 with Pokemon Black and White. Black and White released on September 18th, 2010. They introduced the Unova region, which was based in New York City rather than in Japan. This was significant because it showed the ever-increasing globalization of the brand. Commercially, Black and White sold about 15.6 million copies. While that might sound successful, it is actually on the lower end of mainline Pokemon games. It took a very long time in production compared to other Pokemon games, and showed the franchise that it was never worth it ever again to spend that much time on a game. From this point forward, Pokemon development became increasingly standardized. After Black and White, long development gaps disappeared. Instead, Pokemon entered an era of near annual releases, starting in Pokemon X and Y, and then ending with Pokemon Ultra Sun and Moon. There was a game every year for the franchise during the 3DS era. This was a pattern that continued on and on until it went into overdrive when the Switch came about. Instead of annual releases, they would release 2 games a year in some years. And when they didn't, they would release DLCs of previously existing games. These short developmental cycles seem to be very short when you compare them to Pokemon's competitors such as Mario, Sonic, and Zelda. The creativity of the franchise did not disappear, but it became constrained over time. Developers are no longer asking what the best possible version of each game can be. They're asking what version can we realistically ship on time to continue the Pokemon machine going. This is also where leadership changes take on different meanings. Shigeru Omori became director during this period of excessive games every year. Many fans blame him for Pokemon's decline, but the timing shows that the system had already changed and Omori was simply on the ride. Compared to Masuda, Omori is much more of a company man and put the priorities of the Pokemon company over the creative endeavors that he wants to go about with. This is not necessarily wrong. All it is a representation of the priority shift of the Pokemon company. By the time the franchise reached the Switch era, the consequences of the system were too impossible to ignore and too far gone to turn back with. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet sold over 26 million copies, making it the second best-selling Pokemon game of all time. Number 1 was Red and Blue, so that's amazing company to have. The game was launched with severe bugs and the most technical problems of any Pokemon game of all time. In most franchises, a release like this would damage sales and force changes executively. In Pokemon's case, it didn't matter. They beat the system. They became so popular during their rise that anything they put out would be eaten up by their fans. This sends a clear message to the business side of the franchise. Slowing down is unnecessary. Why would they give a damn about a game's quality when anything they put out sells amazingly? This creates a self-reinforcing cycle. As long as the games release on time and revenue continues to grow, there is no incentive to fundamentally change the process and improve the games. So where did Pokemon go wrong? Pokemon went wrong at the moment it became too valuable to slow down. It started as a small creative project led by talented people with amazing ideas. It evolved into a $100 billion global brand dependent on constant output. In that system, creativity becomes a risk instead of a priority. The decline of Pokemon is not a failure of talent. It's the result of talent. It's the result of Masuda's hard work. It's the result of years and years of dominance. So after all of my research, trying to figure out where did my beloved franchise go wrong, it clicked. It went wrong because it went too right. The real question is not whether Pokemon can make better games, it's whether a franchise this successful can afford to give creativity the time it needs to bloom. And unfortunately, the answer to that question is hell no. Pokemon will never be good again, because it never needs to be good again. Pokemon will never be good again, because it was good for too long. But hey, I guess we have the old games, right?